You are listening to WTUZ Radio Podcast. Welcome to WTUZ Radio Podcast, and today's episode we are going to discuss the game of chess. So, the imitation of life as the game of chess. So, as we always do, we like to give a definition of what we are speaking on. So, we will do that. Let's go to the definition or the breakdown or the history of chess. So, this may be a little boring for those of you that literally play the game of chess and you know these details. So, just bear with us. So the history of chess can be traced back 1,500 years, although the earliest origins are uncertain. The earliest predecessor of the game probably originated in India by the 7th century AD. From India, the game spread to Persia. When the Arabs conquered Persia, chess was taken up by the Muslim world and subsequently spread to southern Europe. In Europe, chess evolved into roughly its current form in the 15th century. Romantic chess was the predominant chess playing style from the late 15th century to the 1880s. Chess games of this period emphasized more on a quick tactical maneuvers rather than long strategic planning. The Romantic era of play was followed by scientific hypermode and new dynamism era. In the second half of the 19th century, modern chess tournaments play began, and the first official World Chess Championship was held in 1886. The 20th century saw great leaps forward in chess theory and the establishment of World Chess Federation. In 1997, a computer first beat a chess world champion in the famous Deep Blue versus Garry Kasparov match, ushering in an era of computer domination. That's interesting. So, in other words, man versus machine, or ushering in the beginning of the AI. All right. So since then, computer analysts, which originated in the 1970s with the first programmed chess game on the market, has contributed to much of the development in chess theory and has become an important part of preparation in professional human chess. Later developments in the 21st century made the use of computer analysis far surpassing the ability of any human player accessible to the public. Online gaming, which first appeared in the mid-1990s, also became popular in the 21st century. All right, so there is a book by H.J.R. Murray called A History of Chess, but the snippet I'm reading from is Wikipedia, which gives the history of chess, and it gets into the origins. So it gets into specifically into India, and just a real quick thing that I want to point out so you can it'll kind of tie into how we're going to dive into each particular chess piece, and show how this equates to life. All right. So chess was introduced to Persia from India and became part of the princely courtly education of Persian nobility. In Sassanid Persia around 600, the name became Chatran, which subsequently evolved into Shatranj. I know I'm probably butchering all of that, so forgive me. Due to Arab Muslims' lack of chi and nuk native sounds, and the rules were developed further. Players started players started calling Shah, Persian for king, when attacking the opponent's king, and Shahmat, Persian for the king is helpless. See checkmate. So that's interesting. So they're saying Shahmat. Back up in the day, in the Persian days, eventually became checkmate. So it's really interesting how when you dig into the etymology of these words, you see how they evolve over time and the enunciation changes. And in some cases, as we have discussed several times on this podcast, how even the meaning, the original origin meaning of that word changes. And more than likely, it has been flipped to the opposite. All right. Okay, so checkmate, when the king was attacked and could not escape from attack. These explanations persist in chess as it traveled to other lands. The game was taken up by the Muslim world after the Islamic conquest of Persia, with the pieces largely keeping their Persian names. The Moors of North Africa rendered Persia Shattrent as Shatteresh, which gave the rise to Spanish. In Portuguese, it became extra or extras, and Greek Zatrakion. But in the rest of Europe, it was replaced by versions of Persia Shah or king. Thus, the game came to be called Ludus, in Latin Szaszki, in Italian Escas. All right, so and then in French, Etches. I know I'm butchering all of this. Dutch had it spread to Dutch with a different name, German in a different name, Polish, Danish, Norwegian, etc., etc. Okay, so the Mongols called the game Shastar, and in Ethiopia it is called Sintergi, both evidently derived from Shatrans. Chess spread directly from the Middle East to Russia, where chess became known as, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. All right, so it goes on to say how the game reached Western Europe and Russia by at least 3 routes. The earliest being in the 9th century. By the year 1000, it has spread throughout Europe, introduced into the Iberian Peninsula. See, all them other words and tongue-tied me on the simple one. Okay, so it was introduced through the Iberian Peninsula by the Moors in the 10th century. It was described in a famous 13th century manuscript covering Shatranj. Backgammon and dice was also named the Libro, whatever that is. I don't speak Latin. All right, so then it's just going on to say that chess spread throughout the world, and many variants of the game soon became taking shape. Buddhist pilgrims, Silk Road traders, and others carried it to the Far East, where it transformed and assimilated into a game often played on the intersection of the lines of the board rather than within the squares. All right, so then it said, we talked about that it reached Europe through Persia, the Byzantine Empire, and expanding the Arabian Empire. Muslims carried chess to North Africa, Sicily, and Iberia by the 10th century. The game was developed extensively in Europe. By the 15th century, it has survived a series of prohibition of Christian churches, a sanction to almost take the shape of the modern game. Modern history saw reliable reference works, competitive chess tournaments, and exciting new variants. These factors added to the game's popularity, further bolstering by reliable timing mechanisms first introduced in 1861, effective rules, and charismatic players. All right, so you can definitely check out the history of chess on Wikipedia. It goes into more details. It goes into India, and it gives you the pieces, the chessboard pieces, how they are depicted in India. It goes into Iran, East Asia, meaning China and Japan, Thailand, Mongolia, East Siberia, etc. All right, so they did a very good job on Wikipedia with this, running down the history of chess. Now, here's what this particular episode is about. I went through the history to give a depiction of how the game, how far back the game goes, and how the game spread through these multiple places around the planet via these different empires. Okay, so in earlier, it discussed how the game was passed from, it was passed based on the conquering of a nation. So now we're going to get into the actual specific pieces on the game of chess. But let's take a step back and really think about what this game really is and how it is just an imitation of life itself, or how souls navigate, souls and entities navigate in this realm. So you can look at the actual board itself as the realm. Okay? All right. So let's start with, we know that there are various pieces. So you have the pawn, the bishop, the knight, the queen, the king. I know I'm missing the rook. Yep, the rook. So the pawn, which if anybody's a chess player, and by the way, I am not a chess player. I just know how the game works. All right. I attempted to play. My patience ran short. And so I just never got into it. But I do enter and understand how the pieces work. Because as someone was trying to teach me, patiently trying to teach me, my mind started thinking from a spiritual perspective what this game really meant. All right. So the pawn is the least powerful, one of the least, I'll put it that way, one of the least powerful pieces on the board. All right. And it is the most disposable piece. So from a tactical perspective, it can only move forward 1 or 2 squares. And the pawn is worth 1 point. So meaning, if you put that into a life perspective, that means that the pawn is the most sacrificial piece on the board. It's the front line piece. It's only worth 1 point to the game. So meaning the pawn piece is equated to a one-dimensional piece, or one-dimensional from a consciousness perspective. And so from the populace in the realm, the pawn piece represents 90% of the population on the game called life. That's what the pawn piece represents. Always going to be on the front line, taking the hits. Always only utilizing a 1% or the lower fracture of the consciousness. It is viewed as one-dimensional. All right. So let's move on to the bishop. Now, the bishop is considered a minor piece. It's worth 3 points. And it can move diagonally as many squares as it likes, as long as it does not have a blockage in its place. And additionally, how the bishop can move across the board is in an X pattern. All right. So the bishop piece in the game called life represents the 4% of the populace. So that 4% has a little bit of slight power, and it can be viewed as serving the roles of the politicians. All right? So those are the politicians that you see before you that the pawns go out and cast their vote for, because they feel that the bishops or the politicians are running things, that they have the power, when in reality, they only have minor power. They can only move, although they can move in the entirety of the board, they are still limited on. To listen to this episode in its entirety, go to anchor.fm/WTUZ radio. Again, that's anchor.fm/WTUZ radio. And the link is in the description. Thank you, and peace and love.